So welcome everyone to today's webinar, Harnessing the Power of Continuous Learning in Customer Success. We're excited to partner with Waterstone Management Group today. Let me introduce today's speakers. We have Hubert Selvanathan, Principal of Waterstone Management Group, and Jim Coleman, SVP of Customer Success at Totango. All right, so what are we going to learn in today's webinar? Essentially, customer success is not a leave it and set it and forget it function. So we're going to cover why is continuous learning critical for customer success, how to add process and structure to drive results, how to set up key enablement tools, analysis and reporting, and what benefits are achieved through continuous learning. It's a lot to cover, so let's just dive right in. I'm going to first give a quick overview of Totango in case anyone doesn't know who we are. We are a leading customer success platform that delivers on enterprise to customer as a strategy. We have over 250 customers, several tech partners. We're located internationally, primarily based here in San Mateo, just outside of San Francisco. And we contribute a lot to the industry, webinars like these. We host an annual Customer Success Summit. And if you haven't checked out our CEO's book, Farm Don't Hunt, The Definitive Guide to Customer Success, I highly recommend it. And so I'm going to pass it over quickly for Hubert to introduce Waterstone, and then we'll dive into the meat. Hubert?
Great. Thanks, Christine, and thanks everyone for taking the time. Quick background on Waterstone. We are a boutique consulting firm. We work exclusively in the technology sector and technology-related industries. The work we do is primarily around driving a growth agenda and realizing success in subscriptions. Business model and operating model is a key topic close to many of our clients' hearts. And as part of driving success in subscriptions, we naturally have a strong emphasis on customer success programs, including setting up a continuous learning model. So diving into the content itself, continuous learning should be pretty intuitive to most on the call. Applied to customer success, continuous learning is really the ability to continuously gauge how effectively we're engaging with customers and the types of outcomes that we're driving for customers. Being able to measure and analyze what's working, what's not, and ultimately being able to adjust customer success operating practices so that we can affect the outcomes that we want to. The need for continuous learning, so certainly in the tech industry, I think we're all familiar about the dynamic markets happening here. Products are changing, new technologies coming in, customer expectations continuously changing as well, driven by our experiences as consumers. And so in the corporate marketplace or in the corporate space, we've got changing customer needs. In parallel, on the operational side, many providers grapple with a range of challenges. So everything from having the right skill sets in place to execute, to being able to incorporate the right leading industry practices, to ultimately moving the needle in terms of their maturity model. And so all of these put together, the dynamic marketplace as well as the operating challenges essentially put forth the need for a continuous learning model. So what do we mean by continuous learning in customer success? Really, continuous learning can help affect all aspects of customer success. Many of the clients that we work with essentially focus on 4 key pillars when they optimize or set up their customer success program. First one is around being able to deliver the right customer experience and the right customer journey to their customers. Second is having the right operating model, the role, clearly defining the roles and responsibilities, having all of the engagement models, the processes, and the metrics in place. Third is putting in place the right enablement to not only deliver customer success at scale, but also to equip CSMs and the CS program at large to effectively deliver those lifecycle services. And so as you think about enablement, more often than not, the playbooks, tools, dashboards, lifecycle communications, and so forth come to mind. And then lastly, the economic model in terms of what the impact of customer success is ultimately, whether that be in terms of driving renewals, identifying upsells, improving customer satisfaction, and ultimately driving usage of the product or the service. So as you think about these four core pillars, continuous learning can really affect all of the aspects on this page. In practice, we see continuous learning applied more towards the bottom part of this page, so essentially being able to refine the playbooks, update dashboards, ensure that the right metrics are in place, ultimately towards driving the right outcomes not only for the customer but obviously for the provider as well. So setting up a continuous learning model, what we've seen companies do is essentially focus on three key aspects. The first one is setting up the operational analytics, so putting in place dashboards that not only monitor the effectiveness of execution within customer success, but also measure customer results. So certainly customer health, the performance, and then being able to analyze any trends and interesting insights coming out of that analysis, and being able to translate that to what adjustments, if any, we need to make on the operational practices side. So off to the right, there's a few examples of typical metrics that we see out there that get put on CS dashboards. Certainly how many, how frequently are we touching or engaging customers? How's the life cycle going, whether that be in terms of number of onboardings or number of training delivered, and then ultimately being able to measure the health and product usage. So operational analytics is sort of a core component that needs to be put in place for continuous learning. Second piece then is really the ability to make the adjustments to the operational practices. So based on the insights and the analysis from step one, being able to take action and ultimately make the changes in the core CS model itself. And oftentimes we see companies fundamentally change the way they segment customers and they design the coverage model. Beyond that, on a regular basis, being able to take a look at the playbooks and the actions that CSMs take and update and refine those things based on the insights, updating dashboards and making any tooling adjustments to help improve the execution of the process. And then really the last, in order to bring all of this together, really we see companies focusing on putting in place a feedback loop. The intent of the feedback loop is essentially to make sure that we bring the right cross-functional stakeholders together to look at the insights and the analysis, agree on the process adjustments that need to be made, and then actually go ahead and make those adjustments. So oftentimes we see somebody within customer success designated as the quarterback for this. So to the extent that there's a scaled customer success program in place, oftentimes there's a dedicated customer success operations person that sort of chairs this process, makes sure that the analytics gets run, the cross-functional team comes together to look at the results, identify the changes that needs to be made, and then actually go ahead and make those changes, test it, and then deploy it across the account base. And the feedback loop really ensures that this whole process gets executed with a regular cadence. So to make this real, we'll give a couple of examples of how we've seen this in practice. I'll give one and turn it over to Jim for another example. So this first example is a company that we've worked with. They're a large SaaS provider. Essentially launched a new product late last year and wanted to make sure that they have the right customer success model in place to drive adoption of that new product. I think early on there was recognition that there's a lot to learn about how customers are going to be using the product, what their needs are going to be throughout, and so consequently, out of the gate, this particular company set up a dashboard to monitor the execution of CS. So, all of your basic metrics like how many playbooks are being executed, what's the velocity, what's the customer onboarding pipeline look like, and then being able to track the conversions of how many of our customers or how many people within our customers are actually turning into active users. They also had some basic usage metrics in place, so certainly the daily active use, number of logins, and so forth. In parallel, they had also put in place a preliminary set of playbooks designed to onboard a customer, to help drive usage of the customer once they're adopted, and then ultimately to have those renewal conversations and execute the renewals. They also had a very basic customer health scoring methodology in place, but certainly recognized that there's room to improve the customer health as they go along. The feedback loop that they put in place was quarterly. So they agreed on a quarterly cadence to bring in the right cross-functional stakeholders. In this particular example, the stakeholders that were identified was, from within customer success, it was the CSMs as well as the customer success executives. Outside of customer success, the engagement was with customer support, digital marketing, who supported the one-to-many communications for customer success across the life cycle, and then services, who were oftentimes part of more complex onboarding and integrations and so forth. And then lastly, there was a data science team that helped stand up the dashboard and all of the analytics that was also invited to this feedback loop mechanism. And so as part of this quarterly cadence, during the first review process, one of the insights that was pointed out was that the usage levels, the usage activity was fairly highly correlated with how quickly the onboarding happened. And so what the team noticed is that customers that got, or users that got to using the product quickly within the first 30 days seemed to be more actively engaged in using the product as we went along. Second insight that was surfaced during this feedback loop was essentially a need for more training, and this was more qualitative. So based on the stakeholders that participated, CSMs and customer support in this particular instance, the insight around a lot of customer support calls pertaining to how-tos and product usage related questions was surfaced, which then ultimately turned into a small initiative to ensure that we have the right training and how-to content being up there. And so in this particular example, they went ahead and made all those changes. Specifically on the analytics side, they included metrics. They included more metrics in the dashboard to get more color on users. They added different tiers of users, so power users versus basic users. They also started to actively track how many of these registered users are actually turning into active users so that we can engage them and serve up training content, how to, et cetera. And then started to more formally track the onboarding time, recognizing that the first 30 days was critical. The process adjustments that they made in this example was, obviously updating the playbooks. So the onboarding process previously, depending on the customer, could take anywhere from a week to, in some cases, upwards of 45 days. And so the updated playbooks was designed to be more time-based so that CSMs were notified that they needed to take specific actions within specific timeframes to be able to move the customer through that onboarding process quickly. Obviously, self-service content specifically around how-to videos was created as part of as an outcome of this process. As they went along this, the next feedback loop identified the need for further playbooks. Specifically, they noticed that there was usage fluctuations where usage spikes initially, but then after that starts to drop or completely stop altogether. And so there was a certain set of playbooks identified to codify how to handle those scenarios. Also, the need for stronger communications across the life cycle, the one-to-many communication in terms of both in the onboarding phase as well as the ongoing use phase was identified. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, the health scoring was continued to be refined. In this particular case, it was expanded to include qualitative input from the field. And so CSMs, as they get a better idea of how accounts are faring, as well as sales team through their engagement, are able to provide that qualitative input. And then behind the scenes, the health scoring methodology took those inputs to provide more nuance and color on the health score. So this was one example. I'll turn it over to Jim for the second example here. Jim?
Thanks, Hubert. So actually following on with the feedback loop that Hubert just spoke about, one of the key reasons for implementing a technology to help monitor the changes in customer state as well as provide that level of reporting is to get a clear idea around customer health. And this is a case that's this sort of situation is common to many in the CS field. I don't think this will be any surprise, but effectively, if we're starting out with a scenario here on starting out with the best practices that we have and the best available knowledge that we have about our customers, we really end up building our tiers and segments by what's immediately available. What's our initial hypothesis? Might be by contract value, might be by industry vertical, might be by company size, but we set all these things up. Health, again, based on the best knowledge that we have around what constitutes good versus poor engagement by the team, what's good utilization of the product capabilities, and then adoption and activity by end users, and ultimately monitoring this with an automated system. The model and process, again, some of the base best practices we've got in place. Tech touch, driving content for long-running engagement for customers without the need for heavy human interaction. As well as layering on top at the right cadence, what is the level of customer check-in and value confirmation with CSMs. And what we're monitoring for here is really those events in the early warning system is, in the initial stages might be fairly reactive, whether that's escalations, major events, changes in the customer, changes in adoption and usage. Ultimately, the feedback loop that we're looking for is to build something that has a periodic review of customer health. Again, we've got a lot of changes in the market. The products will always change. The offerings will always change with every release cycle. And keeping touch with the customer base is one of those critical things. Understanding that you're continuing to get usage, you're continuing to have engagement, and they're continuing to get value out of the offering is very important. And the two major activities there that we do as part of that loop really have to do with reviewing the analytics. This is something that if you're able to capture all of the customer data into one place and review it on a regular basis, you'll start to get some insight into those hard to see details. And this is where you'll understand subsegments and cohorts, trends in action, and ultimately look to drive some predictions based on that data. And then it's also important to ensure that we actually have the qualitative side of the story as well. And again, the right kind of tooling and technology can help you capture this along the way. But it's also important to do team retrospectives, and that might be a post-delivery review for an onboarding. It might be a periodic, how are our business reviews going, or looking at the processes that are supporting health. One of the scenarios that again is fairly common in CS is that you'll find a surprise. This is something that we're trying to avoid, of course, but if there's a scenario for example, if a segment of very healthy customers, for example, where all of a sudden we get a a swarm of cancellations out of the blue. Clearly, there's something wrong with health, right? So we're looking at what's going on, what are the things that are happening with the with this set of customers that are churning out, ultimately trying to drive some changes in the analytics. So we're going to look at resegmentation according to the churn risk. Is there any sort of grouping or subsegment that we can look at that constitutes a higher level of risk? Are there additional metrics that need to be captured, whether that's on communications with or from the customer, engaging with content, engaging with the tool itself? In many cases, adding one or more human touch elements. So the CSM sentiment is a big piece as part of that early warning system, so that you're able to take advantage of that gut feel, right? So it may be that everything that's being said, everything that's in writing is perfectly fine, all the events are perfectly fine, but there's something wrong with the interactions themselves at a less systematic level. And ultimately, this is what we want to do to refine the health model. The process changes, again, based on that health model. Are there changes that need to happen based on campaign outreach, if that's automated content or if that's direct engagement, focusing on the case studies and the value and the alignment to the use case that's specific for that new subsegment. Updating the operational workflows, the success plays and playbooks to make sure that we have the right level of direct outreach, the right kinds of business reviews and the right kind of value alignment. And in a lot of cases, if we're looking at this and finding that there are subsegments of the health that are changing, what are the areas where, if at all, we need to possibly change the sales qualification criteria to reduce risk in the pipeline? Ultimately, this drives that closer alignment with the customer, the feedback loop with ourselves as well as with the customer, to make sure that we're on track with the use case and business value. We are going to see improved close rates and sales because of the better understanding of the use case. Which areas are we actually winning in? Which areas are we sustaining value in, so that they can get better lead targeting? And then also, again, getting that proactive adjustment around health, so that as we learn on maybe a quarterly basis, once every 6 months, whatever the right kind of cadence is, these are the things that will help you to become more proactive in your outreach with customers, to reduce churn, to drive higher customer satisfaction. So the role of the technology in this is really important for a few key areas. So one of those, tracking real-time changes to metrics, right? So it's one thing to capture all of the data; it's another to monitor for the events. So this is very important for triggering the right kind of engagement at the right time. We've got these programmatic things where we're building out an onboarding. We're engaging with the customer as they come in through a renewal event. But there are other things that happen that we may want to track. Drops or increases in usage, changes in the adoption rates, changes in the way that they engage with us. That help to fire those events and help us to start monitoring what are the new trends and key metrics through the dashboards. The technology, again, pulling back to centralizing all of this data, helps to avoid manual analysis and spreadsheets. A lot of these things can be automated and tracked in one place, so that you can implement those course corrections either with manual intervention or automated programs. And ultimately, having one reference point helps to involve the entire company in the feedback loop, in the participation with the customer, to drive the value company-wide. We're going to jump into a couple quick views of how we look into some of these scenarios on a product. But what we're seeing here is really a single view, again, of a customer. Some of the key metrics that are important to monitor that for one particular customer's health definitions really has to do with how active are they, what's the status in the customer journey, license utilization. As we can see, everything here is really green across the board. We've got great metrics. Everything is showing healthy. In fact, they're a little bit overutilized, so it's a great point to go have a conversation. However, it doesn't mean that there aren't surprises, right? So this is the trigger that, number one, we've got the immediate task to go in and save the customer. But number two, we have to go in and start looking at some of the analytics and some of the characteristics of this customer and perhaps others that are very similar to them to start to try to understand why, so that we can update the health metric so that we get this warning earlier on. I mean, clearly, nobody ever cancels out of the blue. This is something that we've obviously missed a signal and need to go fix it. So when we're looking at the historical health, again, this is a global view of a set of customers. The things that we're looking for, again, are where are the major changes? Are there any places where things break down? Are there any places where there's a hiccup or a bump? As you can see here, somewhere around the end of September, there was a dip and a spike. This is something that we need to go investigate. And again, looking at how we would break this down according to subsegment. It might be industry, might be number of users, might be the licensed product edition, might even be regional area. Will help to see what are the changes that are driving those spikes. Cohort analysis, very important. Even a very simplistic one like this one is how are we able to break down our customers? Something like ARR is very simple. Clearly, I can see here that there's a segment of this particular customer base where a lot of the red, a lot of the risk is actually associated at the very bottom, and this might be due to a number of factors. It might be due to a segment of customers that are very price conscious and pushing hard on initial negotiations. It might be legacy customers from an old use case. We're all in business for a long time. If the product 5-10 years ago, if you've got these customers lingering at a lower price point from the early stages of a startup, some of those things may contribute as well to the risk factor and the health factor. But what this starts to help us do is, again, drill down to find the areas for risk so that we can, as a CS team, help to mitigate that, but also provide the right kind of feedback to product, to sales, to marketing to make sure that we're aligning with the right kind of customers within that market. Again, looking at trends, very important. What we can see here is, again, a healthy, relatively constant set of adoption metrics across all accounts. Which ones are using various product components? And one of the other factors that we might see or might want to look at is what's some of the volatility. So in this case here, we're actually looking at various risk factors, so some that are identified by the CS team, but also looking at transitions from health changes. So for example, if the light blue here is actually a poor health to average health, that represents a save. Where do those live? Is there a trend here? One of these things that we see is that towards the end of every month, there's this clear spike of risk, and then we clear it out. This might in fact actually indicate that there's some training needed on the team to be a little bit less threatened by the end of the month or the end of the quarter, and to try to linearize and look at what's the actual health. Are we over focusing as a management team on how we're working with our CSMs to make sure that we have the right kind of manual processes in place so that they're not over flagging things as we move through a time period. And then are there any other contributing factors? As we can see here, this is just another metric of the trending within reports. Obviously, we see this huge jump here in a rush to the middle. That may be something where what we've done is adjusted the health metric to see if there's a better view of that, or it may actually be due to an event. So again, having the ability to go back and review where are the changes, what are the results from those changes, and ultimately what are we learning from that is a critical piece of the puzzle.
Back now, just to summarize, I think it's pretty obvious from all of the examples here, but continuous learning. You've seen a few examples at play here, but really the idea is how can we harden some of the core assets that we use with our customers, right? So whether that be playbooks, whether that be campaigns and automated programs, dashboards, health scores, etc., and then have the ability to get more insights on the business. And the impact really is to the three stakeholders listed on this page, right? So customers certainly should benefit from a better experience overall, and ultimately leading to getting more value from the product. I think from a company standpoint, financial performance, right? At the end of the day, it's renewals, it's upsells, and customer sat, and so being able to continuous learning can help move the needle on that front. And then certainly from a customer success team itself, having the right tools, having the right information, and having the right plays, if you will, ultimately makes them more, makes the team more responsive and in fact more proactive to customers' needs. So with that, I know there's a bunch of questions coming in. I'll turn it back over to Christine for the Q&A part.
Thank you, Hubert and Jim. All right, so in the bottom left corner, go ahead and submit your questions. We've had quite a few come in. Hubert, while you were presenting at the beginning, someone asked, I think, a little bit of clarification around who are those important cross-functional stakeholders, and maybe what is that meeting cadence that you recommend? Why don't you go first, and then Jim, you go second?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think the cross-functional stakeholders, really want to pick the functions that are customer-facing, as well as supporting those customer-facing functions. So, specifically from within customer success, the kinds of roles we typically see engaged is customer success ops, as I mentioned previously, but also the CSM team, some representatives from there, as well as the CS executives who are looking at the scale of the model, making sure at the macro level that we've got the right engagement model in place. So that's within CS. Outside of CS, ideally you'd want sales to be involved to inject that voice of the customer. Now, we all know hard to get sales guys to come in on a regular basis, and so oftentimes we've seen nominees from sales ops be sort of that voice of the customer at the table. In addition to that, in addition to sales, customer support, professional services, or really any services that is engaged with the customer, and then lastly, digital marketing, because they play a role in sort of that the tech touch, if you will, that Jim spoke about. So these are kind of the main constituents. I think you have, in addition, we've seen companies also invite data analysts. So to the extent that you've got a data science team who's doing a lot of the analysis that Jim just walked through, you oftentimes have somebody from that team participate as well. And then to the second part of the question around what's the typical cadence, this obviously varies not only by company but also by how the stage of the product or service that you've launched. So in the early stages of launch, we see the cadence being fairly frequent, right? I mean, anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks, because you want to rapidly iterate on your plays, your engagement model, and so forth. Once you reach steady state, we see most companies settle around the quarterly mark. So have on a calendar a quarterly cadence to be able to review all of these outputs and then identify what changes needs to be made. I think if you go later than that, you start to run into the risk of being stale, and if you pull it in sooner, then you run the risk of continuously changing things and having to make sure that the team is also on top of what we want them to execute. So it seems like most companies tend to align on the quarterly mark from a cadence standpoint.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, internally with the CS team, however you're structured, I mean, the things that you're going to be looking for are again, whether it's inside or outside your CS team, the operational capabilities. So your CSMs, account and renewal managers, support services, and so on. All of those will be meeting on a fairly regular basis, and I think that's a good opportunity for a little bit of that sort of fine-tuning, real-time adjustment. When we are looking at the external partners throughout the company, again, there's a lot of it's not so much like, hey, come in and do this process reengineering with us that needs to be the conversation, as much as the information that we're reviewing actually gives a lot back to their function as well. I mean, the example for sales is they're interested in win rates, right? So if we can help to identify risk for particular customers, for particular customer types, or major opportunities that there are certain sets of customers that show a very large growth potential, that's obviously a big carrot that you can give to attract the sales team. Likewise with product, having that tight feedback between product and product marketing is constantly looking at what's the right direction for the product, both near term and long term. What's the right way to package? What's the right way to market the product? And having that feedback both from customers directly as well as from the CS team on what's working, what isn't, gives you all those data points to help make those good decisions. So I think there's, in general, we at Totango talk about that that customer success is everybody's business. It may not be everybody's day-to-day job, but it's a big piece of what the entire company delivers in terms of the value to their clients. So I think that having that feedback loop again through internally on a very fast cadence for the operational team and on a regular predictable basis that includes all the major stakeholders from the outside, the rest of the departments of the company is absolutely the way to go.
Great, thank you both. Another question came in. I wanted to know what's like the most common KPI or process that has to be changed because of continuous learning. Do you have any examples you want to give, or what do you think is the most common KPI? Who wants to go first? Hubert?
Yeah, I can take that first. I think the most common KPI, it came up in some of the examples that we just shared, is the customer health score. As most folks know, it's a composite indicator of the overall satisfaction levels of the customer. And so that composite indicator, as you might imagine, there's a lot of inputs that go into deciding that. Not only from a pure data perspective, looking at the usage, looking at how frequently they call into support, and are there any escalations, but also as Jim had mentioned, there's also sort of the human element to this, right? I mean, what are CSMs hearing on the ground as you engage, as you do QBRs, as you do weekly engagements with the customer? What's the sentiment there? And so I think there's what we see is recognition that customer health, the methodology itself, is something that will be continuously improved. And so I think that's one that's fairly typical. In terms of processes that had to be changed as a result of continuous learning, oftentimes it manifests itself in the form of the playbooks itself, right? So whether that be how you run your onboardings, or the types of campaigns that you run to promote usage and new feature adoption, or to take actions against your high churn risk customers. So these are all the kind of more typical processes that get changed as a result of going through this continuous learning model. Jim, any additional thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, definitely fully agree on the health scores being a key thing that evolves over time. One of the other ones that we see a lot is which events to monitor, right? So and what are the changes that we're looking for? So it may not matter, or there may be a lot of variation within your customer base for a particular set of adoption metrics or usage metrics, and it's not so much the fact that they're above or below a level, as much as something's changing, right? So what's the threshold for that change? 5%, 20%, up or down? But what we're looking for there is really to find those signals, and that's a continuous review sort of thing, because those signals can change over time as to where they affect the business. And then I think the thing that we look for with that is, again, we're trying to drive the behavior. So now that we find these events, the things, again, that we're looking for is what are we doing to respond to them? We don't want to be reactive. We want to be a little bit more responsive, proactive with our customers as we can. What are the signals that we can look for? What are those events that we can look for? Changes in what the customer is doing, so that the the playbooks as well as any sort of automated outreach are working in conjunction with the goals that we're trying to get out of those events.
Great, thank you. I think we have time just for one more question, and you guys have spoken a lot about continuous learning at some larger processes like health model or health score. But Jim, question for you: like, have you applied continuous learning maybe down to like an activity level, such as any nurture campaigns, like product adoption campaigns? Like, what would you look at to monitor and fine tune? Do you even do it to that granular level?
So on the particular action, maybe, maybe not, but at the sort of product module level, certainly, right? So we want to look at the volume of activity and the way people are using to start to understand the value of using that capability. A good example with really any customer success platform, if I'm looking at adoption of a tool like Totango, if I'm looking at adoption like a CRM, or if I'm looking at any kind of operational process tool, really, there's sort of an early stage of adoption, and there are all sorts of signals and how people are using the platform that it can often be a reference tool. So we'll see adoption rates and usage rates very high in those things that provide metrics, provide visibility into a customer, provide trend reporting. But over time, as the maturity of the use of the product improves, as we start to get those metrics over, how is the product being used, what's the health, and so on, what we'll start to see is the shift into a different type of work, right? So the modules for task assignment, and workflows, and email outreach, and direct engagement with the customer, those things start to become more important as a proportion of overall usage, which indicates a greater maturity in the product usage, a greater maturity in their own processes, and a greater maturity in the adoption of customer success or the operational workflows that they're working on. And at that point, we do want to start to change absolutely how we're building those product adoption campaigns. Obviously, at that point, different capabilities are more important, but also different best practices, different industry practices. As someone who's now gone out of the I'm looking for visibility into my customer base to the now what of how do I properly interact with them, now I'm going to be concerned about an entirely different area of the business. So I would absolutely say that this that monitoring down to the activity level and looking at the nurture campaigns, looking at interactions in general, absolutely makes sense.
Great, thank you. It's been 45 minutes. I want to be mindful of everyone's time, getting back to their meetings. I want to thank both Hubert and Jim for joining and presenting. On the screen, you'll see both websites, Twitter handles, and email addresses if you'd like to contact us or Waterstone Management Group with any additional questions. Thank you again, everyone, for your time today. Hubert, thank you. Jim, thank you.